Welcome to the second video in this series talking about GitHub Copilot levels of enlightenment. Things, epiphanies, aha moments that I went through personally to get better by using GitHub Copilot. Or I should say get better at using GitHub Copilot. Because I'm the user, of course, and Copilot is my helper. This is a second video in a whole series of 9 videos around this topic. So if you want to learn more about the journey that I went through, then definitely follow along with the rest of the videos in this series as well. This video is specifically talking about context. Second level, know the context that GitHub Copilot can use to work its magic with and give you better suggestions. Here's an example of the basics that are there, knowing all the elements that your editor, this depends on your editor type of choice as well, uses for setting up context for the question that you're trying to do, especially when you're doing things in the suggestions, but also when you're using chat. Know the context that is being used by the editor. All of the things that I'm pointing here to on this slide are actually seen as context that the editor uses to help Copilot with, hey, you're prompting about something. The location of your cursor is an indication because it can see probably that this is what you're working on, you're typing there potentially. And that is an important information for determining the context as well. If you have something selected and you're doing queries in the chat, for example, or prompts, I should say, with something like, can I improve this? Then semantically, the model will understand that, hey, this that you have is probably the thing you have selected in your editor as well. But even the tabs that you have open are potentially used by the editor to add extra context for the question that you're doing, the prompt that you're actually building. Copilot is really versed into, hey, how can I help the user improve or implement the next piece of code, especially when you're doing suggestions, but Copilot Chat does the same thing as well. So sometimes when you see, then you have lesser great examples of suggestions that you can back, then being aware of this context can really help. Sometimes you can close down extra tabs that you don't need, for example, maybe create a new chat session so that you start all over instead of having all the chat history in there as well. All of those things are extra context. And especially for the chat, that's helpful to keep in the back of your head because potentially your entire chat discussion, the thread that you're on so far, we call that a chat session, might be used for setting up the next part of your prompt. So if I switch from something that I'm doing in the backend to something like a deploy script for my application, I usually don't want to have that extra context of the nitty-gritty that I was just working on as context in my prompt that I'm building. So start a new suggestion would then be the recommended way to do that. Quick and a short mini demo for this. Let's say I have the demo project that I've been doing this entire series on. As I said, cursor location is important. If you select something and then you ask a question about this in the chat, for example, I have a new session. I can say, for example, explain this. Maybe even add a question mark, even though it's not necessary. And it will look at the context, it tries to build that up. And from that, for example, you can see that Copilot is using a specific reference in here. You can see, hey, there's a reference used. And in this case, it's probably the file that I have open. The editor determines that, says, okay, the planes controller lines 50 to 57, that's my selection. That is being used for the context to figuring out what this is when I'm talking about that as well. So be aware of those things. You can start to improve that by opening up extra files, for example, and all those things are hints for Copilot of, hey, what context is important? And in this case, it said, well, you selected something, so only that selection might be important. If I don't do that, and I have, for example, a lot of tabs open, maybe I can improve the way that Copilot is suggesting things for me by closing up all the tabs. And then let's see the planes controller, and let's open the plane model. Should open them so they stay open. And I can even do that side by side, depending on the editor that you're in. These are now all extra suggestions or information points that Copilot can use. The editor in this case, my prompting Copilot. I think these are probably the things that the user is currently working on, and those might be important. And you see that every once in a while as well. If you start adding properties, for example, to your classes, and I have the planes class in here, let's say I do a public, let's just do a string for image URL, yeah, and the getter and setter works. Save that. If I go back and I start typing here, Copilot remembers that, hey, you just added something in the planes file. It can keep track of some of the history, for example, in there, and says, okay, you just added an image URL. There's a very good chance that you want to add an image URL to this plane, because that's the implementation of the plane class. So you can see, knowing how your editor determines the context for the queries, and I haven't even started talking about things like chat participants, like we call them, like add workspace, or commands like that, how they can help shape your context, knowing what you have open in your editor, the selections that you've made, all those hints that your editor is picking up. Knowing that can make you a better user of GitHub Copilot. And with that, I see a lot of benefit for myself of having that understanding of this is what being used to set up the prompt that I'm taking with all the context that we're giving. And that can really help speed it up and get better results as suggestions out of GitHub Copilot. If you want to see the other videos that I went through, my own level of enlightenment for using GitHub Copilot, then check out the other videos in the series as well. And then hopefully you can learn a lot from that more. And then hopefully you can learn a lot from those videos as well.